151 or find SMS Trading on Facebook.
The Mannin Line, brought to you by netzeromatrix.com, the Isle of Man's main net zero progress website.
Thanks to Mike, good afternoon. It's 7 minutes after 12 midday. Mannin Line is on now till 1. Call 66 13 68 to speak to the Minister for Environment, Food and Agriculture. Clare Barber, MHK, is with us. Wide variety of subjects covered by the department, so please don't leave it late. Don't be a stranger. The Isle of Man sawmill, plant health, hills and uplands, animal health, environmental health, health and safety, planning. Crikey, we could do a show on planning completely. First of all, welcome, Clare Barber.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Good to talk to you. And everybody is asking, first of all, are you well?
I'm much better. I'm not going to say I'm completely 100%, but I'm much better than I was.
Is it true, and forgive, you can tell me to get knotted, was it a horsefly that bit you?
Yeah, so I got bitten by a horsefly. Interestingly, I had more than one horsefly bite, so it's a horrible thought, but whatever was on the horsefly before it bit me is probably the cause of where my problems began. But it did lead to a 2-week stay in the hospital, where I was ably looked after by a huge number of some former colleagues, some new staff up at the hospital. But my leg isn't the prettiest, but it's considerably better than it was before.
You were not well at all, were you?
No, I wasn't, although I did still manage to dial into meetings, partly because, being in a side room, I was a bit lonely. So sometimes it was nice to dial into a meeting just for some human company. Okay. But we were both ill at the same time, just different things.
My word. Right, let's get to the phone lines now. And Julian's with us first on Mannin Line. Hi, Julian. You're live with Clare Barber, MHK.
Hi, Andy. Hi, Claire. I'm glad to hear you're feeling better, Claire, after the horse bites. I do get them occasionally, and they do come up quite big, those things. They're not nice.
No.
You recently stated in the press that you're quite frustrated with new build houses being fitted with fossil fuel boilers. I think you described it as the wrong thing. I think that was what you said recently in the press. But I notice if you look at electric heat pumps, which seem to be the alternative these days, they can require up to about 40 times more electricity than your typical fossil fuel boiler requires. And I think the upfront installation costs with insulation upgrades are around £20,000. And also, of course, we've got this 30% increase in electricity tariffs. And I know that, is it 2025 that fossil fuel boilers are going to effectively be banned, which is only about 3 years away. So just wondering, what's your solution for replacing all the fossil fuel boilers?
So I think the first thing that I'd say is it was actually on a Manx radio debate on another topic where that came up. And from my perspective, I think what we need to be clear on is that the fossil fuel boilers are not going to be the future. So I think that was the point really I was trying to make. And we've already got a commitment around the date, as you say, for putting fossil fuel boilers in new builds. And then there's a later date that's fossil fuel boilers for broader property consideration. So there's definitely a piece of work, though, for me, that needs to be understood around how that just transition works, how we support people to make those changes. And that's a big part of the consideration that the Climate Change Transformation Board are doing at the minute, which obviously now sits within DEFA, although I was already sitting on the board, how we can support whether the Green Living Grant is the right way in terms of supporting people, how we work and make sure that people building new builds are able to make those changes. And there's a number of considerations that have to be taken into account as to whether those developers have already bought the boilers that they're going to put in, and I know that in some cases that is whether planning permission's already granted, and people are running a programme that may be over a prolonged period that may go past the date that we're talking about. So there's lots of stuff that needs to happen, but from my perspective, I think the principle is there is a frustration if we're looking at how we come out of the other end of using fossil fuels, how we make sure that people aren't putting things in that ultimately we may not be able to actually utilise within their lifespan.
Right, but I mean, this is actually, it's almost, it's like 1 minute to 12 then, isn't it? Because there isn't really a solution that seems to work. So if you're banning them, what's the replacement? Because I think people need to know, because I don't think there's many people going to be too happy with a 20,000 quid install charge, even with the best will in the world, because most houses aren't suitable for heat pumps, which seems to be about the only thing that anyone talks about in relation to an alternative. And those things are designed for underfloor heating if you're going to get the best out of them. And if you're not going to do it that way, then it's aluminium radiators, and they're expensive as well. So that's on top of the 20,000 if you haven't got aluminium radiators or you haven't got underfloor heating. So what sort of cost, I mean, is there a solution that's on the drawing board that at least people can know about? Because there's things need to be told now. It could even be 2 and a bit years from now, couldn't it?
So predominantly at the minute is the air source heat pumps are the main alternative that's being talked about. You've got ground source heat pumps, but I take your point that, you know, certainly when people are putting changes into their current property, I think that's a slightly different question, because that for me is where there's a significant question around how people can resource that. And as I say, that's where we need to look at the Green Living Grant. We need to look at making sure that those houses are properly insulated, and actually it's more of a holistic piece of work, and that is scheduled for later down the line. But the first piece for me is, you know, we're currently building whole estates with fossil fuel boilers, and that's something where we have to be working with the developers to look at how we can progress those to using non-fossil fuel powered heating.
And first things first, I mean, the Climate Change Committee wants to ban fossil fuel heating systems in new builds from the year after next, 2024.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely, you know, it's looking at that aspirational position. Should we be putting up a large number of new developments, sometimes with 100 plus houses, all with fossil fuel boilers? And I think, you know, certainly the vast majority of people I'm talking to are saying, actually, is that the right thing to be doing? Probably not. As I say, it's a very different piece when we're then talking about adapting our current housing stock.
So two stages, new builds and existing properties. Yeah,
absolutely, because the points Julian makes 100% right. If you look at our current housing stock, one of the challenges we have, a large number of those at the minute, we don't have the ability to retrofit. Air source heat pumps wouldn't be appropriate for them, and certainly that's the case for some of my colleagues in Tim, or some of the some friends I've got. That just wouldn't be an option for them. So I think it's really important to separate those two pieces out. But if we're building new properties, that's the piece of work which we want to bring forward. But as I say, there are those considerations where you've got a developer who potentially has a supply, and we know that that has been the case, or where they've got planning permission already, and that would then slow down the construction of properties.
So they may have forward bought 500 boilers.
Potentially, and we need to look at how we manage that. So there's a number of considerations, and that is very much the work that's ongoing at the moment.
Okay, Julian?
Yeah, Manx Utilities, what do they say about this? Because a boiler at the moment, if you look at, say, I don't know, a Worcester Bosch Green Star, which a lot of people have, when you switch it on, it's just really the pump that's needed to power it. It's just to pump the water around, which is sort of like an old style light bulb kind of power, 125 watts. But if you've got colder weather and you stick on a heat pump, you're looking at about 5,000. So you're looking at something like every house on the island switching from an old light bulb to a double oven all at the same time, potentially all night. Or, you know, if older people feel a bit cold, they might want to leave it running all night. Can the existing electrical infrastructure handle every house on the island suddenly switching from one light bulb's worth of heating to a double oven, all of them?
So I think it'd be fair to say that they couldn't handle every house immediately making that change. But as I say, at the minute we're talking about new builds, so that isn't what we're looking at. There would be a phased implementation elsewhere. We're seeing some people have already, you know, been early adopters of air source heat pumps. You know, there will be a period of time that we phase out putting in new fossil fuel boilers, but that at the minute isn't what we're talking about in terms of that date we're pulling forward by the year. What we do have, though, is Manx Utilities sit actually now on the Climate Change Transformation Board in an advisory capacity, and they come into every other meeting with us, but are also there if we need, and you know, if we frequently are running things past Manx Utilities, because you should say it'd be crazy for us to put together something that sounds great but can't be delivered, because ultimately this has to be something where we're all working together for the right outcomes, which is ultimately to move ourselves away from the reliance on fossil fuels.
Okay, Julian, I mean, you sound like you have misgivings.
Well, you know, I mean, the two things that are talked about is heat pumps, and then you've got electric cars. And the calculations that are being done in America at the moment are that each electric car that sits on your driveway will quadruple your energy requirements, you know, compared to what, you know, at night, you know, you've just maybe got a charger on and a bit of heating maybe in the winter or whatever it is. But can the infrastructure survive all this at the moment? And, you know, can you survive digging up every pavement on the island to put charging units in for cars? You know, this whole, you know, the heat pumps are all part of this kind of formula where the cables that you see outside, I mean, they're going to go on fire with this kind of level of draw. I mean, the MUA doesn't seem to be included in the idea that how are you going to get all this power into everyone's house?
Okay, all right. Well, we'll leave it there, Julian, because we've got more people want to get on, but we appreciate your call. But we're with the DEFA Minister, Department for Environment, Food and Agriculture. Clare Barber is on Mannin Line today, and David's with us now. Hi, David.
Hello there. Hi. Just a few points. We're talking about renewables. We're at a point now where we need to change from gas to a different form of heating. And I know just outside Leeds they're doing trials now on hydrogen boilers. Are we really seriously telling the people that we're going to build housing estates with no gas mains in the housing estates? And then when hydrogen comes on stream, everybody is committed in that housing estate to being to using very expensive electric air source heat pumps and storing water. It doesn't make sense to me. It's the green lobby has just gone totally ahead of itself without thinking what's coming down the line.
I think the point we're making, David, and I'm grateful for you phoning in, is that we need to be looking at alternatives to fossil fuel. That's the key. We need to be looking at what those alternatives look like. I know that there is some thought that some of the gas systems we have already can be switched very easily to hydrogen. There's also some feeling that some of them couldn't. But there is a big piece of work, as I say, going on, working with the MUA, with the Climate Change Transformation Board more broadly, about making sure that what we're putting in is fit for the future. And I mean, Julia made the point about electrification. We're going to see an increase in how much electricity is needed, unquestionably, in how we go down this route, whether that be through the electric cars, through the use of electric in terms of our heating. But there is some exciting stuff happening around hydrogen, as you say, and there may well be other stuff. This is certainly a fast-paced, fast-moving area, and people much cleverer than me in the world of electricity and power generation, coming up with all sorts of new ideas. And it may well be that some of the things that are in very early stages of being researched become the thing that are adopted. So I agree. What we don't want to go down a route of cutting off all our options, but we've got to use the best available technology.
David?
Yeah, I understand that, but if you build a building site with no gas mains in the infrastructure, then when hydrogen hopefully does come on stream, it's a pure form of heating, and the only emission that comes out of it is water. Well, for the rest of the term of that house is going to be committed to electric.
Okay.
You're not giving the builder an option.
No, but interestingly, I was chatting to someone who does some of the installations the other day, who was talking about actually bottled hydrogen, and that may be an option because some of the pipes that we currently have in our infrastructure for our established housing wouldn't take the hydrogen. But if you could put it in bottled hydrogen, you could then put it straight in, and the new boilers can take it. So it may well be there are other solutions available to us. So I think, as I say, it's very much an evolving piece of work. I think the key principle is we don't want to be putting fossil fuel boilers into your brand new properties.
Okay. All right. Thanks, David.
Okay.
Appreciate that point of it. We're back to the days of coal gas. Everybody having a bottle outside. A couple of notes in now. This is Texter 667. Bearing in mind the amount of heavy metals coming down the Neb into Peel Bay and down the river from Snaefell into Laxey, are you happy, or do you monitor the levels of heavy metal in shellfish and crustaceans?
Yeah, so we monitor levels of heavy metals both in some of our river courses where we know there's issues, and we also do monitor for all sorts of things actually in our shellfish, both from various things you might find in the water to make sure we're not seeing impact from some of our other discharges and from heavy metals. So yeah, there's a huge amount of monitoring. I don't know all of the specific items we check for, so I don't want to make a promise for a certain item. But I've been into the government lab and seen the various tests that they carry out. They take the shellfish, they open up, they pulp it all down, and then run it through machines to check for levels sitting within them. I'm sure we can find out. If you want to leave details with the radio, happy to drop you a line with a bit more information on that.
It'd just be nice to know if there are. Because obviously we know there used to be heavy metal mines there. There must be metal going down into that part of the sea. But it's just interesting where that's concerned. A message in now from Helen, who said, Andy, would you ask Claire her views on the notion of having red squirrels on the Isle of Man? They're in such need of a safe environment away from the grey squirrel, worth considering the wildlife agencies, working with the wildlife agencies in Britain. Red squirrels for the Isle of Man.
Well, I mean, I did grow up in an area where there were red squirrels and grey squirrels and lots of them. And, I do recognise it's a declining population in the UK and there is a risk. I think my reticence in terms of all of these things is not wanting to make policy on the hoof, I suppose. We talk a lot about wallabies and we talk a lot about wild goats and we talk a lot about the wild hares that are animals that we have already on the island, and the potential impact, and we're limited in terms of the data we have around the impact they have on our other wildlife. I'm not averse to looking at any of these animals and understanding better how we can manage populations, and I think red squirrels would be something I would talk about in that sphere. I'd have to understand more about any potential impact on our local populations of animals before I was willing to look further at that. But I do have a sympathy for the red squirrel and its plight.
Okay, a message from Kelly, who said recently on Manx Radio, you said that you don't have the resources to cut down every diseased tree. Can't you ask for more money?
Well, we do ask for more money for lots of things, but I think the reality is there's a finite amount of money, unless we look at other ways of raising more. So we're in a position at the minute where we know that ash dieback, Dutch elm disease, Phytophthora ramorum, we know these diseases and new and emergent tree diseases are having a significant impact. And I spoke recently in Tynwald and I said, our landscapes are going to change on the Isle of Man. And that's something that worries me. It certainly...
These things are racing through, aren't they?
They really are. And, next week I'm spending a whole day actually out with the team, the forestry team within DEFA, to actually see some of the extent in some of our areas that the tree diseases have covered. And the reality is, I think with some of these diseases, we've lost that fight. It has already spread, and pretty much all of our trees are impacted and will need to be felled. So there's a difference between different tree species as to whether they will stay standing, actually quite stable, and not be a risk to other trees which start to drop their limbs essentially, and then present a risk, especially if they're on roadways or they're in our plantations. So a priority at the moment has to be around safety, but we are at a position now where we're not financially resourced to be able to go out anymore and cut down people's trees on their behalf. So that's something I've asked the officers if we can really look at whether we can make a claim to further to Treasury to ask for additional resource. But the reality is, as I say, that is at the minute predicated around safety. Whether we can look at working with the climate change funds as well to actually look at an adaptation, to look at different species of trees, to try and make sure we're putting those trees in that aren't affected by those diseases. But there's a lot of work still to happen in this area. But it's certainly something that concerns me, because one of the things we take for granted is you look out and see these vast expanses of trees, and the reality is that we already know that come 5 years, 10 years down the line, when we look out, it's not going to look the same, because quite a significant number will go. As
a proportion of the trees then, can you hazard a guess as to the percentage of trees that will go in the next 10 years?
No, I'm not going to hazard a guess. Just
10%, 15%?
Percentage-wise, I'm not sure, but I know that when we gave the answer in Tynwald, I think we talked about around 50% of the trees of those species significantly affected. But the reality is then we're also seeing newer tree diseases coming. So it's changing as fast as we try and get on top of one.
What's causing that?
I think a lot of these diseases originate elsewhere, and then they travel on the airstreams. Because I think when you look at how they come across the globe, they do follow a pattern that follows the sort of streams of wind, and once they land, they're sadly
so will there
take
be
hold.
Is there going to be a program of planting new trees, immune trees from stuff that on the Isle of Man?
Yeah, so that's certainly one of the things the forestry team are looking at is not replanting trees that we know are already impacted by established disease. But as I say, we can't mitigate against future disease, so there is always a possibility that other diseases will come in. But I've got a team of people who this is very much their field of expertise. I'm someone who is very much learning, which is why I'm spending a day out with them next week, because I want to understand more. This is coming up more and more. There's certainly more concerns, that I'm aware of, and I think it's really important that I can see, for myself, and then be confident that anything we're putting in place is the right plan. I'm not going to pretend it's going to save all the trees, because it's simply not. That's just not going to happen.
Okay, Keith dropped a note in. Have any plans been made for the upgrades to Solby Claddock camping for next year?
No. So one of the things we're looking at is the future of Solby Claddocks, and I think it's fair to say that this has been something of a challenge. And I know that a lot of people are very invested. And
that's code for something of a challenge.
No, I think it's fair. It genuinely is something of a challenge, and the reason being because historically, Solby Claddocks has been available for people to go up there and camp, and I've seen photos and I've talked to people who've spent a lot of time up there, and I can see that it's a place that's brought a huge amount of joy to people. The issue that we have as DEFA, on advice from for example legal advice we've had, is we can't be in competition with established campsites, and if we're going to operate what is to all intents and purposes a campsite, we have to operate it to the model standards for campsites. That then takes a lot of investment, which then means we need to start charging commercial rates, which then means it's not the accessible and open place for the public that it used to be. And so I feel like everywhere I go with it, I come back full circle. So at the minute, the toilets were condemned. They're in need of refurbishment. That's a significant investment for DEFA, and that's money that at the moment we just don't have sitting there in the budget. So an interim position for the season it was open has been to put in portaloos. Now I know that for people who go there, they'd far rather, as I would myself, have an established building, but that just hasn't been possible. So it's certainly an item that is frequently being discussed and comes up regularly, but I haven't got the answer yet.
Okay, Terry Kay says, could you please ask Clare Barber, does anybody from her department ever check the temperature of the chilled and freezer trailers coming off the ferry to make sure the goods are being transported at the correct temperature, now with the price of all foods on the increase?
I don't know, Terry. Again, I mean, I'm happy to check. I know, there's huge amounts of monitoring that does go on through the regulatory function of DEFA, but to that specific question, I don't know, how we decide which bits we would check in terms of temperature for importing trucks. But again, happy to find out if Terry wants to leave some details and we can respond to him.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Heather just dropped a quick note in and just said, did I hear Clare Barber right? 50% of ash and elm will be gone from the Isle of Man.
I think that's probably a conservative estimate. The reality is it is hugely impacting those two trees. So it's a concern that I think we all have. And I know when I gave those numbers in Tynwald, certainly I think it really opened a few eyes. But there's no point, me saying something and saying, oh, everything's fine. It's really not. Significant volumes of those trees will go.
And here's a message in from Max, who said, do we have Japanese knotweed on the Isle of Man?
We do have Japanese knotweed, yeah, and there is policies around management of Japanese knotweed.
Who brought that here?
I don't know, but I don't know.
It has to be brought, doesn't it? It's something...
I think we with all these things we do end up seeing them here, but I mean whether it's a case that those seeds can fly in the same way that some of the bacteria's it's probably not bacteria, is probably the wrong word, some of the spores that go into the trees, I don't know, so I don't want to say whether someone packed it in their suitcase and secretly brought it over and planted it.
But the department deals with Japanese knotweed, does it, or is that a private function?
Do you know, I don't know the answer. I feel like saying don't know. In terms of Japanese knotweed, we certainly provide advice. I don't know whether we go out and remove it, but I know some people who have opted to remove it themselves following the rules, why I'm hesitant to say whether we do or some people have just chosen to manage it themselves.
Yeah, well, it's not just when you get it out of the ground, it's where you put it when it's been in the ground. We're with Clare Barber, MHK, Minister at the Environment, Food and Agriculture Department. You want to get in touch? Call, text, email or WhatsApp.
Come and say hello to the Manx Gas team at the Southern Show. Find out about our new energy-efficient boilers, our fantastic smart home products, and how you could save energy this winter. Manx Gas, part of island life since 1836.
Summer's here. Lazy days, long evenings, and big savings in B&B Furniture's summer sale. Up to 25% off throughout the store means you can make the most of summer with big savings on sofas and suites, kitchens, and top brand beds and bedroom ranges. Plus, there's up to 3 years interest-free credit and the option to pay nothing for 3 months. The summer sale ends this weekend at B&B Furniture, Snugborough Trading Estate.
I love gelato, so I love gelato. I love gelato, so I love gelato.
Welcome to the beautiful island of gelato for the best Italian ice cream. And now mouth-watering made-to-order pizza too. Big seating areas upstairs and down or takeaway. I love gelato, 42 Bucks Road, Douglas. Open Tuesday to Sunday, 12 to 9.
I love gelato, so I love gelato.
In the summer sunshine, there's nothing better than going into the garden and enjoying ourselves. At Ramsey Garden Centre, we've an array of great garden goods to dress your garden for your next family barbecue, your next book, or your next beautiful flower bed. With everything from solar-powered lights, beautiful perennials that flower every year, to stylish water features for that zen moment. Visit Ramsey Garden Centre on Facebook to see a selection. Or even better, visit us 7 days a week on Albert Road.
Jackson's and Motormall are delighted to sponsor the main ring at this year's Southern Agricultural Show and support essential food and agricultural industry on the island. Find us by the main ring for some show-stopping special offers. Jackson's and Motormall.
The July sitting of Tynwald saw a number of significant announcements from Chief Minister Alf Cannon which could radically alter the social and physical landscape of our island. So why is government doing this? How can we possibly bring 15,000 new people to the island when the younger generation are struggling to buy or rent a home? And how will this new residence drive differ from others which merely provided a short-term fix? The Chief Minister joins me for an hour-long agenda special tonight at 6 p.m. on Manx Radio and talks candidly about the problems we face and the solutions Council of Ministers is offering. The Chief Minister is clear on what's needed, but is he right?
The Mannin Line, brought to you by netzeromatrix.com. The Isle of Man's main net zero progress website.
Clare Barber, MHK, is with us on Mannin Line till 1. Here's Dewan. You're live with Clare Barber. Dewan.
Hey, good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, Claire.
Good afternoon.
Claire, I'm looking at what's going on in other parts of the world at the moment. I'm talking about farming here now. And the looks like overreach of government again with the problems with nitrogen and stuff like that and the conditions that they're putting on farming in the Netherlands and Germany. And, of course, the massive pushback that's happening there and the rioting and the protests. My concerns are, and this has been shown within government recently, of things that's getting signed off that's not being looked at properly. And I know you guys are getting masses and masses of paperwork put on your desks and stuff that obviously is like nothing that you guys are trained in. So my concern is that, you guys are signing stuff off that's not getting read properly. My question is, on the future of farming here, what support the government is going to give going down the lines, obviously, of this green agenda and climate change, which is all linked in together. And this is what's causing the problems in many parts of the world now, which obviously the media are not advertising, but it's clearly there. And my point is, what's going to happen here on the Isle of Man, self-sustaining for what we've got here and the people of the Isle of Man, rather than this far-reached outlook of 10 and 15 years down the line of projections, of looking after our farmers and our farming here, and where or what stance the government is in helping and supporting that for the local people for the future.
Yeah, so we have a number of schemes that we use to support farmers, and in fact we're looking at them now, because I'm very keen that we provide additional support at a time when farmers are really up against it, I think it's fair to say, and we're seeing that through the input costs. And you talked about nitrogen, feed. We've got freight costs, fuel costs more generally. There are some significant challenges for our farming community, and ultimately that impacts on our food security. So I've been very keen to make sure that the support that we're giving is getting to the right places. It's all very well pushing grants out left, right and centre, but the reality is if it's not actually getting to where it needs to be, it won't achieve the right outcome, which is ultimately, from my perspective, to make sure that those who are farming on our land are able to continue farming on our land and providing the food that we need. So, yeah,
I absolutely agree with that. My point is on what's happening on other parts of the world, which I don't want coming here. Obviously, is my point.
Oh, this is the situation, I think, particularly in Holland, where the green lobby or the government's come to the conclusion that farmers have to cut their nitrogen use, and it's led bluntly to farmers spraying sewage over municipal buildings because they feel they've been ridden roughshod over.
Yeah, and I think.
Sorry, go on, Claire.
It was June. Were you still talking? Oh, sorry. So I think one of the challenges that we have, and that's why it's so important we get the food security piece right, is at the minute we are heavily reliant on imports in terms of food. I would advocate for people to spend more locally to support our farmers, then to be able to increase their production. But I also do recognise that there are some items we don't produce here, and potentially some items will, in reality, not be able to produce here. But it certainly is concerning when we look at the bigger global picture of farming and agriculture, when we look at the changes in subsidies, when we look at some of those very short-term decisions around things such as nitrogen. And I like to think, here we're working with farmers. We've looked at additional payments to support purchase of nitrogen fertiliser, and we recognise that that does allow farmers to to produce a greater crop, but also then looking at how we can support farmers to make changes in terms of how they use fertilisers. And we're seeing some great examples already on the island where farmers have looked at how they can move away from some of those modern day fertilisers and use other items to help with their produce. But the reality is it's not fair to simply arbitrarily cut everything off, and the knockback would be production would significantly fall at a time when food security is so key. But I do recognise we are in a challenge position because of our reliance on imports.
Okay, final word, June.
Yeah, I was one other subject I just wanted to touch on, Andy, quickly. A totally different subject, Claire, and I know you're a very big supporter of the LGBTQ movement over here, and very good. I think it's great that they've got a voice in government, etc. I just wanted to put to you, or have your opinion on, we've got a very big, massive woke agenda on going around the world at the moment with some crazy stuff, especially the pushbacks in America. What do you find or think is an acceptable age to start promoting non-gender and binary sexualities within schools? This has been a very, very emotional topic which is creeping into school boards around America and such. And I'd just like to get your take on it as a supporter of the LGBT and also as a minister.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd probably push it back and say, actually, a lot of the argument is that we do push a heterosexual almost a normality on children from a very young age. So I think what's being asked for is actually let's step back from that and simply allow children to just explore for themselves. I think it's almost moving back away from promoting any form of sexuality and gender specific behaviours, and just having a far more generic upbringing that's being asked for. And I think that's probably being misrepresented, is probably what I would say in the media. But certainly from all of the many people that I'm friends with across the pansexual, bisexual, homosexual, transgender, agendered, asexual, there's so many different people that I know of. None of those people have been stopped from being who they are by virtue of being brought up in a heteronormative society. So I don't know if that answers the question, but actually I think that almost the question has become the wrong one, because I don't think anyone's suggesting that we're promoting homosexuality. It's not about promotion of any sexuality or gender. It's about saying, actually, let's simply let children be children. And I think I'd struggle to find anyone who doesn't agree with that.
Okay, thank you, June, for that. Here's Sean. You're live with Clare Barber. Sean?
Hello there. Hello, Claire. Glad
Hi,
to hear you
Sean.
back on the men now.
Yeah.
Hope you're not going to feature in too many Young Farmers concert sketches because of that now.
I'll be there with me peg leg.
I've just got a few comments about DEFA, really, and the whole farming situation. I'm on farms every day of the week, and I've not heard any positive comments about what DEFA are doing at the minute, I'm afraid to say. And I know you're at the forefront of it, and a lot of the decisions aren't yours. They're down the line by some experienced farmers, I'm sure, in the civil service. But this tree schemes for planting trees, we can't eat trees, can we? You've got to look that we need to be growing food on the island for the island, and then if it's excess, it can be exported, but it can't be exported. I mean, there's some farmers who've got fantastic contracts in the UK for the products they're supplying, they're growing over here, because we've got less weed intervention over here. The crops are cleaner. They like that in England, but when they go to ship it on the steam packet, it's £4,000 a trip with these Arctic wagons. And I know the government keeps saying, well, we own the steam packet, but they're at arm's length. But you can push to reduce the costs, and we know you can. You just need to push the right people. And also on the imports of stuff, you've got a colleague at Manx Radio there who he was on the advert a minute ago, going on about agenda, I think it was, and it's fantastic to hear him on the radio. But he's the one, and I'll name him, Mr. Gorn. He's the one who sailed the farmers down this route of the countryside care scheme, and he was told at meetings by some very clever farmers with years and years of experience. And I sat at these meetings, and he was at the front, and farmers stood up and said, it's not going to work. The island is going to look like a very untidy parkland. And he said, well, if you've got better ideas, you tell us. And it was very rude to these farmers. He was very rude to these farmers. And what's the Isle of Man look like now? A very untidy parkland. There's more hay cut around the island this year. It'll be needed, to feed the stock. But there's that much stock left the island. Does that mean fellas not farming properly because they don't need to now because they're getting paid not to farm in some respects? We could all see this 10 years ago when he introduced his countryside uncare scheme, as it's known as now. When you're passionate about farming, I know you are, you need to kick some butt and sort this rubbish out, because in 5 years' time, it's going to be too late.
Yeah, and I take the feedback, and I'm grateful for it. And I do spend time talking with farmers, and as you say, I'm hugely passionate about farming on the Isle of Man, and certainly the changes that I'm looking at seeing within the various grant schemes that we have are very much focused on making sure we're supporting active farmers, because I think that's what this should absolutely be around. It's not about supporting people who've got lots of land and don't produce anything. Absolutely, that isn't where my focus is. And it's interesting you pick up on the freight cost, because obviously that's a significant piece, both in terms of import and, as you say, in terms of opportunity for export. So we are working with DFE on that, and I'm certainly very keen that we find a solution that will work. Obviously, once I've got a little bit further around the work with DFE, then I'd want to talk to the MNFU, make sure we're working with stakeholders, because actually, if I'm not looking for feedback on this thing, not just this, actually everything we do, then ultimately I'll get it wrong, and I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that we've got a sustainable farming sector for the future, because I think we've got a really brilliant example, in terms of what we farm on the island. It's certainly in terms of the quality of the end product, and I think we need to be shouting about it even more.
Yeah, but all this talking, with all due respect, Claire, it's not happening quick. People are worrying about how much corn to grow next year for the dairy cows, the costs of it, and they're thinking, well, are we even going to bother? Are we going to get out of the cows? All of a sudden, there'll be a shortage of milk down the road here at the milk plant. There'll be a shortage of meat in the meat plant. Talking takes months in government. You know that as well as I do. You need action. And, the red meat derogation, for example, that was phased out because they went to Europe and said, oh, we've got the red meat derogation. Europe didn't give a monkeys. They could have carried that on and missed the goal and said, oh, no, we've got to tell them. Now you've got 80% imports of meat and 20% 80% is imported now and 20% for the local market. We didn't need to say anything about the red meat derogation. We're not in Europe now. All these things. And what are actually DEFA doing nowadays? They've got rid of a wool to a Irish or Welsh company. Grain intervention no longer exists. The only thing DEFA are actually doing off their own bat is artificial insemination on the farms now, and they're probably going to farm that out to somebody else. You've got ADAS coming over here every few months. At what cost? It's all coming out of the pot. And it's just so frustrating. And you're saying you're going to talk to DFE, but that could be this time next year before they get any action there. I'm so frustrated, and so are all the farmers. There's no buzz in farming at the minute.
Okay, all right, Sean, we get that point. You've made many points. Thanks for that today. Just a quick one in from Adeline, and this is, what is going on at Laxey Mills? Will they be planting wheat? Will the growers be planting wheat for the mills later on this year? Can we sell the flour that we've got? Is there a future for Laxey Glen Mills?
So we have wheat that's in the ground now. A reduced number of people have planted wheat. We've got wheat that we have in storage at the mills, certainly enough for at least 2 years. And the mills are continuing to function at the moment. There's a couple of questions have been answered in Tynwald on this topic, and what DEFA have done is paid for a review into what the future of the mills will look like. That's expected imminently, and ultimately Treasury make that call, but with us obviously advising from a DEFA perspective. It is a Treasury-owned company, but DEFA are a key stakeholder in that because of the impact on food security. But certainly I've made comments previously, I absolutely want to see a future for a mill on the Isle of Man. I think that's very important. We've got bakeries that are still here and operating, providing us with a considerable number still of bread products, and I think it's important that we're milling here.
Okay, we're live with Clare Barber, MHK, till 1 today on Mannin Line.
This is the Isle of Man talking, the Mannin Line.
Q Plus is much more than a plumbing and heating trade counter. Come and explore the largest bathroom showroom on the island, where we're always updating our displays and stocking the latest bathroom designs and trends to make sure we have just what you're looking for. Visit Q Plus on Snugborough Trading Estate, or find us on Facebook to see some fabulous bathroom inspiration.
QPlus.co.im. The Mike's Motors Summer Sale is now on.
We're number one. We're family run. Mike's Motors. Mike's Motors.
Don't miss the Mike's Motors huge summer sale event. Save on cars, save on commercials, save on campers and motorhomes too. But be quick, at these prices, once they're gone, they're gone. Don't miss out. Click mikesmotors.im. Call 823 200.
Mike's Motors.
That's 823 200.
Every drop is precious. Water. So easy to take it for granted, isn't it? Our reservoirs supply the needs of our island, but with the effects of climate change, that's becoming more challenging every year. Manx water is the only water we have, so we need to make every drop count by using it wisely, at home, in the garden and in general. Visit manxutilities.im to find out how you can begin smarter living to lower energy bills and reduce your impact on our island environment.
The Southern Agricultural Show is on this Saturday and Sunday from 10 till 6 at Orrisdale Farm, Ballasalla. It's a great weekend out with all your favourites, including livestock, horses, dog shows, vintage machinery, plus loads of entertainment, local food and drink, shopping and competitions for all the family. The Southern Agricultural Show, sponsored by Haven Homes. Don't miss it. This ad is sponsored by Orrisdale Cottages and your nation station, Manx Radio.
The Mannin Line, brought to you by NetZeroMatrix.com, the world's leading carbon register and validation ecosystem.
Look at that time, 9 minutes before 1 on Mannin Line today. Lots and lots of questions to get through before 1 today. And Peter, you're live with Clare Barber, MHK.
Oh, hello, Mrs. Barber. It's Peter Murcott speaking.
Hi there.
First of all, just like to say that my wife and I were really sorry about this illness that you've had, this horsefly. My wife knows all about it. She's not had the trouble that you've had, but she mentioned, I didn't actually hear it, but she mentioned to me that you'd been in hospital, and just wanted to send you our sympathies about that, and I hope you'll soon be better.
Thank you very much indeed.
Now, I wanted to ask you, I believe that your name was mentioned in connection with the proposed hate crime legislation. Is that right?
Yes, so I've certainly, I did an interview with the newspapers on that just recently.
What I'd be interested to know is whether it's possible to make any preliminary submission on this, before, at the time while they're just considering how they're going to draw the legislation up. Because, quite frankly, on the Mannin Line, this is such a complex problem that it isn't possible to raise the issues over the air. But I do have a number of concerns. First of all, with regard to the fact that in the English legislation, there's been a lot of problems for freedom of expression because hate has not been defined, which I think has been a very, very major omission. Secondly, generally speaking, I'm not aware that to counteract that there is a freedom of expression clause to save people from being accused of hatred when they're simply making moderate, responsible comments. Because hatred has rather quickly in Britain descended into, I just don't happen to agree with your opinion, which is creating a society which I might say is one of applause, amen, and silence, which was rather reflected by Franco's Spain, but which we don't really want to see in the Isle of Man. And the third thing is, I'm just wondering how they're going to cope with the question of the protected characteristics, because at the moment, as far as I understand it, your Offences Against the Person Act say things like it is illegal, quite rightly, to inflict grievous bodily harm or to cause malicious wounding or any of those other crimes that are to be found in that act. And it does not distinguish between one person and another. The law says, quite rightly, if somebody gets assaulted and suffered actual bodily harm, grievous bodily harm, malicious wounding, call it what you will, that is contrary to the law. And again, at the moment, if it is thought that there has been an inadequate sentence at one level, there is the provision in law to have a case referred to the Court of Appeal by the Attorney General's reference against what he's may be thinking is an unduly lenient sentence. Now, those are the sort of things. So I would just, and there's more than that, is there any way in which some of this can be fed into the system? And just for information, I used to teach criminal law, amongst other things, up at the Isle of Man College.
Okay, we have a minute to do that. Thank you, Peter.
I think just to say, Peter, the thing to do would be to feed that into Jane Paul Wilson in Home Affairs, because they're leading on the hate crime legislation. So I simply make comment as a chair of Isle of Pride.
Okay, I mean, do you think that using the term hate speech or hate crime, does that make something bigger than it isn't? Does it over-egg the cake, as it were?
No, I mean, I think certainly some of the examples I've heard, the only possible description you could use is that they were said with hatred. And I think it's important that we have appropriate definitions in all of our legislation. So I absolutely take that point. But, from my perspective, there is a need. And I know that when Jane Paul Wilson spoke to the newspapers, she said as an initial step, it would be to put some of these things in as aggravating factors within the current legislation. Because actually, as she recognised, a proper hate crime law needs full consultation.
OK, all right. Thanks. And thank you, Peter. Thanks for being with us today. And by the way, my next question, Clare Barber, was going to be about the People's Forest, but we'll leave that there. Thanks for being with us today. Glad you're on the mend, and hopefully we'll see you before Christmas. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, and likewise to you, Andy.
Clare Barber, MHK, has been with us. This coming Thursday, the chair of the Climate Change Transformation Board, Daphne Kane, will be here. If you want to get a question in the meantime, email manninline@manxradio.com or call the answer phone on 682 631. Thanks to producer Barry Redfern today.
WINT. Crossroads, Isle of Man.
Crossroads is looking for support workers